following is my own true story from my personal experience. They do not speak on behalf of the United States Marine Corps or any other U.S. Marine.
This story is so ridiculous that if I didn't have this picture, I wouldn't bother telling it because no one would believe me. I became a Marine Corps shooting instructor with a freshly dislocated shoulder. And I'm not talking about, oh, I got it about a month ago or a week ago before attending the course. I'm talking about less than a day before my shooting course began, I completely dislocated my left shoulder and it was out of my socket for so long that my muscles started contracting and they had to give me fentanyl to pop it back in. How I dislocated the shoulder isn't that crazy of a story. I was going for a run, tripped, fell, and well, kablam. But it was the fact that this was the evening before I had to start my combat marksmanship coach course, aka shooting instructor school. And as you can imagine, I sort of need both arms to accurately shoot and reload a rifle and pistol. Thankfully, instead of putting me down, the doctor told me that once they had popped my arm back into place, that I was to be put into a sling for 2 weeks and to absolutely not pop my shoulder back out of place again for any reason, and that I was forbidden to do things like lift my arm above my shoulder, lifting anything heavy, or performing complex maneuvers such as manipulating a firearm. This was because, as with any shoulder dislocation and torn labrum, the more times it pops out of place, the less stable the shoulder becomes, and it can lead to long-term complications if the shoulder doesn't heal properly. So naturally, I decide that the best course of action is to show up on the morning of the course and see what happens. Welcome to episode 13 of Marine Corps Chronicles, which is crazy to say because I really didn't do shit in the Marines unless you count cutting off a few years of my life with energy drinks. And this entire series started off as essentially an accident as I started, and still am by the way, a gaming channel, albeit I do branch into different subjects. But because of all of your support, this video is a big thank you for reaching 90k subs. And so with that being said, let's get into the story. That morning I show up early in my car, and as I'm waiting for the first day of class to begin, I'm trying to think of some ways to not get immediately booted off of this class. Now I did tell my chain of command that I dislocated my shoulder, and by that I mean I just told the staff sergeant in charge of me from my unit, who was also sent on this course with me. This staff sergeant, also one of the best leaders I've had, knew I really wanted to go on this course and just told me to also show up and see what happens. Anyways, I'm in my car trying to see if I should ditch my sling just so I wouldn't appear like a complete dumbass to my soon-to-be instructors, but as I am not double jointed, and let me tell you that my arm had a consistent dull pain that turned real sharp every time I held my arm in any position other than the chicken wing, I could hear, and I know that sounds crazy, but I could hear my freshly relocated shoulder rattling around the socket, and just having that sling off and walking around, not only was it painful, but it felt like my arms were going to explode out of their sockets anytime, like I was built like Jack Skellington. So I decided to keep on the sling despite looking goofy as hell, and just do my best to convince the instructors to let me stay on this course since I was already there. But I can hear some of you already asking, were you even allowed to be on this course with a dislocated shoulder? And the answer is hell fucking no. I was 100% not medically cleared to attend this course and should have been dropped. In fact, I almost scrapped this entire video because my unit, the people involved, the instructors, many of whom are still in, can absolutely get in serious trouble for medical negligence or something like that for what happens in this story. So am I just snitching everybody with this video? Well, no, because I'm keeping the name of my unit anonymous alongside the names of everyone involved. So I am not snitching, and I know how to keep a secret. My staff sergeant knew that I wanted to be on this course, and the instructors in charge of us were willing to accommodate, meaning that I still had to pass the course, but they weren't going to make me do any intense physical training, an obstacle course, or just something ridiculous. And so shout out and thank you to my staff sergeant and instructors for willing to keep me, but getting on the course was the easy part because now I had to actually pass the course. The combat marksmanship coach course is a little over 2 weeks long, closer to 3 weeks if I remember correctly. And the first half of this course is focused on shooting and teaching rifles, and the second half is dedicated to pistols. Thankfully, the first day was just more classroom stuff, assigning gear, etc. Nothing actually strenuous. The actual problem arrived when I got out of class. While on the course, we were instructed to have long sleeves for the most part. However, if for whatever reason we needed to walk around the base, such as going to the chow hall, we needed to roll our sleeves. For those that don't know, in the Marines, your combat utility uniforms, aka camis, all come in long sleeves. This means that if you're somewhere hot or just need to have short sleeves, you have to physically roll them up a certain way, and yes, this is a skill where they come out looking crispy and clean. This rolling sleeves thing is an old-fashioned Marine Corps tradition. If you're ass at rolling sleeves, they're going to look real sloppy, what we call donut rolls because they look like donuts. However, when you roll sleeves, while they're supposed to be tight, they can get tight to the point where they have to cut off your sleeves, like with a pair of scissors, because they're cutting off your circulation, and they're so tight that you can't get them off. And yes, I've seen this happen on numerous occasions. This happens because when you're putting on the uniform, the sleeve might feel a little tight, and only when you have to actually take it off or start trying to take it off do you realize that you fucked yourself. Well, on that first day of class, we leave with rolled sleeves since it was the summertime and we were walking around base. When I get back into my room and I'm changing, I realize that I can't get my sleeves off without any help. My staff sergeant, who is also my roommate, comes over to help me take off my uniform, and he starts pulling when I physically feel my shoulder leave its socket, followed by searing pain, and then it pops back into place as he lets go. And I'm like, oh shit, how do I get my uniform off without ripping my arm off? So for what felt like the next hour, we tried all sorts of ways to get my arm out of the sleeve. We tried wiggling it around so the gap widens. We tried sticking a pen underneath to the sleeve to try to get it loosened up more. And while the sleeves were on tight, it wasn't on tight to the point where you needed scissors to cut them off. It was tight as in just snug enough that my unstable shoulders started doing things it shouldn't if you tried taking them off. We tug, we pull, pause, and we try our best to get the sleeve off until finally I'm like, fuck it. Let's just get the others to yank down the sleeve as hard as they can until they finally get it off. And if my shoulder pops out of place, then we'll just pop it back in after, because I mean, it was already freshly dislocated. I make my left hand into a fist and press it into the chest of the Marine in front of me. That way, as he starts pulling, my arm doesn't have any distance to travel forward and hopefully doesn't dislocate a third time. And I feel like I'm in a saw trap with searing pain until finally the sleeve pops off. Amazing start to this course. I haven't even fired a rifle yet and I already entered in a boss battle with my own goddamn uniform. Fast forward to day 3, this is when we start handling firearms outside the classroom during our instruction period. And when that day came around, my arm was not even close to healed, and honestly worse off than the first day due to the constant dislocation. This is also when my friend snapped a picture of me. I wanted this course badly, but one wrong person seeing this link could get me kicked out immediately, as well as other people in trouble. So up to this point and throughout the rest of the course, I could only wear my sling in and around class or when I'm completely away from the class, where I just look like any other light duty Marine. But when people came to stop by our class for whatever reason, I had to hide my injury so that other Marines didn't start asking the wrong questions. Now, I shoot rifles left-handed and pistols right-handed. It's a long story, but the gist is that I was born left-handed and then I was forced to do everything right-handed. What this means is that it actually wasn't that hard to shoot rifles even with an injured left shoulder, because it is my right hand doing the reloading and more of the action, while my left side is for the most part maintaining control of the rifle, pulling the trigger, and pistols on the other hand were much more difficult, but we'll get into that later. Anyways, we start going over the new annual rifle qualification test, the ARQ, and this part is extremely important, so let me break this down for those who don't know. For the ARQ, you're wearing a helmet and flak jacket, and you start all the way back at 500 meters, and then you work your way closer and closer to the target while changing positions, using your gear for support, shooting under time, shooting with barricades at moving targets until you're only 25 meters away from the target. What this means for my freshly dislocated shoulder was that I wasn't just shooting the rifle, I had to drop into prone, get back up, move with my gear, manipulate the weapon, reload, and do all of that fast enough to actually pass. Along with these issues was trying to shoot with the use of a day pack, which for some shooting iterations means that I would have to unsling the shoulder straps and repeatedly throw the day pack on and off my body, which is a little bit difficult for me to do when I could barely use my left arm. The other option was to use this bipod grip hybrid that I actually really liked in general, not because I was doing some high speed trick shots with them, but because you could set down the rifle with the bipod deployed and keep it out of the dirt, and then wait for another Marine to trip over it and then steal all their loot. My plan was to use this bipod grip and minimize the movement with my left arm, and things were looking pretty good. I could reload with my right arm, I had a nice little bipod grip attachment for supporting while shooting prone. I was ready for rifle qualification, or so I thought. About a week or so into the course, we had to now qualify on the rifle range. At this point, my left shoulder was barely healed if at all, and again, I couldn't wear my sling all the time because even if my instructors were cool with it, some other brass from some other unit might see me with a sling in the CMC course and start asking questions, so I had to keep it low key, which also means my shoulder couldn't heal properly, never mind the additional dislocations. On the day of rifle qualification, I got to the 500 meter line and, when signaled, dropped prone. As I hit the prone position, I didn't even really think I landed that hard. The jolt and force of my body hitting the ground with all my gear causes my arm to pop out of its place like a Lego piece. Like, I heard my arm pop out of place, and while there was still pain, it was more of a dull sensation compared to the intense, sharp feeling during my first dislocation, which I'm not sure if it's a good or bad thing. I reached over with my right arm and felt my left shoulder where my arm goes into the socket, and I could physically feel a dent, like an actual dent where my arm was supposed to be through my uniform. And without thinking, I turned my left arm into the chicken wing sling position, and then I felt my arm snap back into place. By the time I finished doing this, I hear a ceasefire being called, and at first I thought I caused it, until I realized that the 45 seconds we had to shoot this first iteration of 5 rounds was up, and I had fired nothing. So now I had 5 extra rounds more than everyone else, a freshly dislocated and relocated shoulder that was even more injured than before, and we just started the goddamn day. And since I was on a range with a bunch of people from and not from my CMC class, I also didn't want to tell anyone about my shoulder issue because then people are going to start asking questions and I'm going to get booted off the course. I start to panic a little because if I fail this qualification because my arm is messed up, then guess what? I still don't become a shooting instructor. My new plan is, when we drop prone again, to fire off 10 rounds instead of 5 in order to catch up to everyone else. I double my rate of fire for the next iteration, and even if I missed a few shots, it was still better than not firing any shots at all. We do this for a total of 8 times at 500 meters before we move up to the 300 meter mark, and then we do the same thing again. Now, I'm dropping to the ground and landing with all my weight on my right side, my good side. Even then, I can still feel my left shoulder crackling in the socket, and the recoil of the rifle, which shoots 5.56 and is very light, especially coming out of an M16, is still making my shoulder feel like it's about to fall apart any second. I get through the rifle qualification and end up shooting expert. Barely. But as I was saying before, shooting rifles is still relatively easy with my condition because my good arm is still doing most of the moving. However, now we had to shoot pistols and things get much more complicated as I shoot pistols right-handed, which means my left arm has got to do most of the work. Pistol qualification was the part where I genuinely thought I would fail. In the United States Marines, the standard issue pistol is the 6 Sauer M18, at least on paper. There were, at least at the time I was in, a bunch of M9 Berettas still being issued. And those M9s, let me tell you, look like something you would loot in a zombie apocalypse. Pretty much every single M9 Beretta that I've seen and handled in the Marines were so worn out that many didn't even have the original black finish on anymore, at least on most components, and looked more like stainless steel pistols. For this class, we had about half 6 Sauer M18s roughly, and the other half were M9 Berettas. And guess what? I got issued the older M9s, and so I was low-key jealous of the people that got the fancy new pistols. But the main reason why I wanted the M18 wasn't just cosmetic. The M9 Beretta has an infamous smooth but heavy double acting trigger pull for the first shot, followed by a very crispy and smooth single action. The M18 is striker fired and therefore has a consistent lighter trigger pull, and most people I talk to do find it easier to shoot the M18 consistently compared to the M9 in double action. The issue was that because my left arm was still pretty much useless, I couldn't use both arms to have a modern two-handed grip on the firearm, and instead I needed to do a modified stance that I just straight up made up on the spot, and it looked absolutely ridiculous. I used my left hand to cup my right elbow for support, and then when needing to reload, while still having the pistol pointed down range, I would bring my right hand as low as I can so I didn't have to strain my left arm to reload that way. But because I had the M9 with the heavier first shot, I found it much more difficult to essentially shoot one-handed. And yes, you can absolutely train to nail targets with one hand in double action, but it was the compounding factors like how everything was timed and that we still needed to do stuff like speed reloads and put rounds on target. And my reloads were noticeably slower than everyone else because, well, yeah. And so the method I used and decided on was to cock the hammer of the M9 before each first shot, which I know looked even more ridiculous given my shooting stance, but that way it was much easier to squeeze off the first shot with only one hand on the pistol. And when pistol qual day does come around, the entire experience was hilarious. I showed up that day nervous as hell because of my shoulder injury and just hoping to pass, but when we started shooting, that shit looked like shrapnel from a bomb going off with the rounds hitting everywhere. We had to shoot at the 7, 15 and 25 yard line. The 7 and 15 yards were fine. I mean, people were still missing their targets at 15 yards, but when we got to the 25 yard line, all hell broke loose. You ever see footage of someone shooting a pistol at someone like 10 meters away under stress and they're missing, and you think, how can they miss from that close? Well, it's because for most people, shooting a pistol accurately at a range isn't too difficult. But when you add extra pressures like time or real life, suddenly one wrong movement, one jolt, one reaction can send your around flying in a completely different direction. At 25 yards or it was meters, I forget, the people were sending rounds like 5 meters short of the target or completely over them, smacking the berm. I saw dirt puffs behind my target because someone else was either shooting at the wrong target or accidentally sending rounds into my target when I wasn't shooting. I'm almost certain it was because of the double action trigger bolt that people were missing so badly. Thankfully, because we had plenty of time to practice and dry fire before pistol call day, I was pretty smooth with using my made up stance and cocking the hammer before each first shot, alongside reloading, albeit awkwardly, without eating too much into my time. And yes, I did end up shooting expert and passing the course to become a combat marksmanship course graduate. But this is not where the story ends, because during this 2 to 3 week course, never mind the constant dislocations throughout, my shoulder did not have any time to start the recovery process. And not only that, but when we got back to the unit, we had to get ready to go on a field operation, and since my shoulder injury was technically unreported, at least to the rest of the chain of command, I would be sent on this field op to do some miscommunication and other controversies, shall I say, so it would lead into a whole entire ordeal, but the exact details of that field op is for another story. I am bringing this up because while I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to become a shooting instructor, my decision to push through this injury did actually really fuck up my shoulder to this day. I'm told I need surgery to stabilize my shoulder. The moral of the story, if you have an injury, despite what I did, you should just let your chain of command know and let it heal properly. Because the complications from this injury would eventually lead me to get an honorable medical discharge from the Marines a little bit after picking up sergeant. There was also a low-key investigation, a whole bunch of stuff that went down that I prefer not to put on the internet since they're related to private medical stuff and people's careers, and also why I'm keeping the names of my unit and the people I was with anonymous. So again, I'm not trying to blue ball anyone with the story ending, but please forgive me for not wanting to blast my entire medical history on the internet. And with that being said, feel free to check out both my civilian stories and other Marine Corps Chronicle episodes if you missed any, alongside joining me on Twitch if you want to. But most of all, I want to thank you again for your support and taking your time out of the day to watch this video.